On another live episode of Collider Movie Talk, the director for Robocop Returns has been found. Kathleen Kennedy's future may be uncertain, and we got a Dracula spin-off movie. Just when you thought Invisible Man was enough, we got Dracula coming out too. We're going to talk about all of that on a brand new episode of Collider Movie Talk live this morning at 9 a.m. once this logo is done being shown on the screen. There you go. Welcome. How are you doing, everybody? Sitting in again for the lovely Perry Nemiroff, who is 3 days deep in Cabo, having a blast. And if you haven't seen that video of her doing some bungee jumping, which is really sold her on the trip, go and watch that on the Collider Video Instagram or Collider Video Twitter. It's a lot of fun to see her. And she goes full bore into it. She doesn't fall off that thing. She fully jumps out, which scares the hell out of me. So there you go. I'm your host, John Rocha, today. And, we got a lot of great stuff to talk about. And I can't do it without two incredible people sitting by my side here. The first is the lovely Haleigh Foutch. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited. Are you excited?
I am excited.
Let's go. Let's get
Robocop.
to it.
I'm excited.
Robocop. Come on. I'll buy that for $1. And then on the end there, the editorial lead over at Adam Tickets. That's Alisha Grauso. My first time doing anything with you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. How are you?
Good. What's the t-shirt?
It is Vampire Fangs.
Oh,
So,
that's it.
Yes.
It's not from a movie or any kind of Rocky Horror or nothing?
No.
Okay.
It's just just
A love for the general
just
genre.
my brand. Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that story a little bit later on, certainly on the show today. But we start off first with this story of Robocop Returns. This is fascinating. We were just talking, Haleigh and I, off camera, and she was saying, this sounds like your kind of story. Yes, it does. Finally, a little Robocop action. And we get, it was announced by MGM that Abe Forsythe is being tapped to direct this film. THR reported it first. He's coming off his recent film, Little Monsters, and of course, before that, Down Under. This time, Robocop, it's getting the Halloween Terminator Dark Fate treatment, which essentially means they're picking up right after the original film, the Paul Verhoeven 1987 film, and the less said about Robocop 3, the best. Original screenwriters Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner are producing the film, along with Alice Entertainment's Richard Suckle. They wrote the original version of the sequel script with screenwriter Justin Rhodes, who just did Terminator Dark Fate. So this is there's a lot to talk about here that's very, very interesting. Just wanted to give you a little background on that and who's involved. But Haleigh, I go to you first on this. Hearing all these people involved, on the heels of the Charlie's Angels flop, on the heels of the Terminator Dark Fate not doing so well, on the heels of all these reboot remakes not really capturing the public's imagination, does this seem like a wise decision? First, the director, yes, but the idea of doing it, making it a direct sequel to the 1987 original.
Well, it didn't work for Terminator in terms of money, but it did work very well for Halloween. So, no, I'm on the same page. I mean, when I wrote up the news yesterday, I was very much like, what a choice right now after this year's box office. Because there are like 9 different IP titles that just crashed and burned. It's definitely a risky time for it. However, if they have a really strong take on it, it could work because themes of sort of technology and identity and law are so much in the conversation right now that there's a lot to work with there. And I do think Abe Forsythe is a really interesting, unexpected but well-fitting choice, particularly if you've seen Down Under, which has a very mean sense of humor.
Yeah.
As does Robocop.
Right. Yeah. Well, and didn't Little Monsters have a race element to it as well, a racial element to it as well? Or did either of those films have a racial element? I thought I'd read that they
Down
did.
Under didn't. Down Under did.
Down Under did.
Monsters.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he has that in his toolbox as a theme, at least in one of his movies. So you talk about police, and certainly nowadays this idea of this racial profiling, or people kneeling during football games to try to protest what they see as police injustice. This, once again, because people, if you remember the 1987 Robocop film, certainly was topical for what was going on. This idea of a police state, this idea of like people being told what to do, being controlled. That was a big fear in the 80s. I remember I was there. And so to see it kind of circling back is very interesting. And do you agree that Forsythe is the right person to tackle this, Alisha? And do you want to see him tackle these kinds of issues?
I really like him as a director. It'll be interesting to me. I think it will be interesting to see, because both of his movies are very like dark, kind of black comedies. And while the original Robocop definitely had really dark comedic elements, it wouldn't at all have been classified as a comedy. And so it'll be interesting to me to see if he can kind of channel his natural instincts to want to lean into the comedy and dial that back a little bit to have kind of that black humor in it, but being able to actually kind of layer that with nuance and saying something, because that's the thing I worry about is a lot of these movies is they don't really have all the commentary that they did in the originals. And so I'm hoping this isn't just kind of a straight action sci-fi movie. Like I hope there's a little bit more depth to it.
Yeah.
But I really like him as a director, and I think it's a really intriguing choice. I'm just wondering if he can kind of fight what seems to be his natural tendencies to lean all the way into the humor and kind of use that when he needs to as a tool rather than as the kind of overall brush that he paints with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Haleigh, go back to you. You mentioned the Halloween situation. They were successful, $10 million. Whatever the production budget was very low, it kind of led to them making a large profit overall. So do you hire a director from a smaller independent vibe so that you keep that budget low, seeing the mistakes that Terminator Dark Fate made, to a degree the mistakes that Charlie's Angels made in terms of the budget? Do you see that them going with a smaller budget here to do Robocop Returns?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, I think it was a few movie talks ago that I was on, we were talking about this, and Perry and I really were like, stop doing your budget so inflated because you're just not going to succeed that way unless you're Disney basically right now, or one of Universal's 2 top franchises.
Right.
I very much hope so. And there's nothing inherent in the Robocop design that demands a profoundly large budget. It's the sort of the genius of Rob Bottin's design is the simplicity of it, and that's why it endures.
I mean, like look at something like Upgrade. Like Lee Whannell did Upgrade, and I loved Upgrade, and I feel like I feel like it's gaining more appreciation now, and it kind of has a feel of almost like a culty movie. But I wish more people had seen that movie because it's so good, and that to me was very much like, this is what you can do. Like there's still room for stories like this here, and you don't have to do it on a huge budget. You can make a really good movie on a small budget and have it be really solid. Yeah,
it'll be interesting because the 2014 remake from Jose Padilla, that was a $100 million budget for that movie. It made $242 million worldwide. So you look at it, well, does that warrant then going back to a larger budget? I mean, I would hesitate, like as you said, Haleigh, the design does not necessarily need to lend itself to this huge technological thing. In fact, the original wasn't a huge technological thing. It was just this side of a B movie, RoboCop. So it's like, okay, well, why would you go back and spend the $100 million? I'm in that place now, 20 tops, 20 tops, and that includes talent. So let's swing back around to that. Peter Weller, obviously, the original RoboCop. Joel Kinnaman in the remake. If we're doing a direct sequel, are we bringing Peter Weller back and de-aging him? What are we doing here?
Or setting it now.
Right, exactly.
Oh, setting it now. So he's been a cop for this long?
Yeah, or you can...
Interesting.
That's an interesting idea.
Okay.
I mean, that would be following the Halloween and Dark Fate track that they've set a precedent with, I guess. I was thinking about this a lot yesterday, like who I would want to see under there, and I think that's interesting to bring back Peter Weller now. I don't know if it has the same impact as bringing back, Jamie Lee Curtis or Linda Hamilton, just maybe by nature of the face or the fact that so much of his face is covered, like it's not quite the same impact. Right. But point being, I was like, I want to see Michael Shannon play RoboCop. Ooh. That's where I landed.
Yeah, I could see that. Absolutely. What about you, Alisha?
Oh man, now I'm just thinking about Michael Shannon.
I do that all the time.
Dang, now I'm kind of stuck on him. It's interesting because I think you could put a number of actors in here. I honestly have to say I don't really have a specific choice for this because again, he's covered the whole time, and so you kind of need somebody that can just kind of portray that kind of stoic vibe, but deliver those kind of deadpan liners. Man, I don't know, but now I have Michael Shannon in my head.
Sorry, I did it to you.
Well, because it's interesting. I'm thinking of like Pedro Pascal and The Mandalorian too. Like you don't really, it's hard to connect with him so far because you never see his face, and I feel like it's a little bit like that with RoboCop. It's a little because you never see the eyes, you never really see the face. So it's interesting to see who they might cast for that.
It might be interesting to cast a black actor here if you're going to go head on into this idea of police possible injustice or racial profiling here. If you're going to explore that as a theme, Black and Blue kind of did that recently. Deon Taylor's film with God, her name escapes me now. Naomi Harris, right? Naomi Harris, I think is who it was. She was the lead in that. Her confronting this idea of being a cop trying to expose corruption and confronting that being a black cop in the whole situation. So if you have maybe someone like, I don't know, Chadwick Boseman, Michael B. Jordan, those are possibilities that Michael you can play with there, because then you have the inherent nature of a black cop being turned into RoboCop, him confronting the other cops or confronting crime. That adds a lot of complexity and depth. I think a studio might be scared to do that, but if you're only going to spend 10, 20 million, it's not a bad gamble to take if you want to really go and capture the subtle inherent.
If we're going that route, Sterling K. Brown.
Oh, nice.
That's a great choice. Absolutely.
Which would be interesting because he's so warm and bubbly in person that I think I'd be interested to see him. But having seen Waves, I think that, okay, I'm going to go with that. Sterling K. Brown would be my choice.
I mean, it does seem, there's nothing to confirm that that's the approach that they'll take to the story right now, but it does seem sort of the natural destination when you think about the themes and the climate of today's environment. It does seem they would probably take sort of the Watchmen approach, so to speak, which leads me to Yahya Abdul-Mateen II.
That was could be great
okay.
too.
I was thinking,
absolutely, And if you lean into the humor, you're not making it a full like, hey, this is what this is about. It's more like we're looking at society, making jokes at society's expense, but also subtly exploring what's going on underneath. Verhoeven, for some reason, was able to do that in the 80s, which shocks the hell out of me when you look back at it now, because I used to dismiss his films like crazy until you start analyzing his films. You're like, oh, well, I didn't know you were working on that level. Jesus. Okay, well, we'll see what happens as it goes along. Neil Blomkamp was supposed to do one, but he walked away from it. There was issues about, MGM wanting to go forward with this, him not wanting to go forward as quickly. So do you think this was, they were just waiting they just had to go forward and wanted to do it? Do you think Neil Blomkamp was absolutely right when he walked away? I
mean, it does seem like it was like 3 months ago that he said they got to go, and now they're going. So that tracks. And Neil just can't seem to get the franchises he wants.
He also seems to have a very specific, he's one of those directors and filmmakers, and I respect him for this, that has, whether it works or not, he has a very distinctive vision, and he doesn't want to compromise. And I think that if they had asked him in any way to compromise or in a direction he didn't want to go, then I think it's probably better that he walked away. I'm not sure if that's what happened. I'm just saying that it might be a little bit easier to take a filmmaker that doesn't have as much experience under his belt and kind of shape it a little bit.
Here's a monkey wrench, or not a monkey wrench, but rather here's something before we move on. What if it's female RoboCop? Who would you cast at that point?
Ooh. Huh. Now you said Watchmen, I'm just thinking of Regina Hall.
Yeah,
I'm so bad at thinking of people.
She's unbelievably good.
Yeah.
Put her in any role, honestly.
Okay.
Or Jean Smart, for that matter.
Listen, my Jean Smart love has lasted for decades.
That's hard for me to think of.
Female RoboCop.
The both of the male versions came to me pretty quickly.
Ming-Na Wen.
Oh, interesting. All right. All right. Interesting.
Just watching her for years on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., even though I've fallen off of that, she can really bring a level of she has a deadpan sense of humor, delivery, and she's great. She's one of those actors you actually believe when she throws a punch. And I think that's kind of important in an action movie. I kind of get tired of seeing action films in which you don't really believe that the actor could hold their own in a fight. And I feel like she could. So.
Yeah. A lot of cutaways.
Yeah.
When you watch stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlize Theron. Terrifying.
I would love that.
She would scare the hell out of me.
I would absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Just have an entire movie of just a whole squadron of just RoboCops.
Yeah.
Just multiple RoboCops.
Yeah.
And then we can just dreamcast anybody we want.
I love it.
I got two choices. I got Gwendolyn Christie.
Nice.
Oh, great.
And kind of on the back end, depending on what happens in Mandalorian, Gina Carano. Gina Carano could be interesting. I haven't seen the rest of the episodes of Mandalorian. I've only seen the first 2, so I don't know how she is in that. She's made a number of comments that she feels like she's become a better actress having worked with Favreau, and there's certainly precedent for certain actors kind of discovering how well they can be later on in their process. And she certainly had that MMA background. That could be an interesting thing that could come into play. Another was I would love to see Evangeline Lilly do it as well. But
she's
only
great.
a Wasp, though. So.
Gina Torres would be another one.
Oh, yes.
Lovely.
Very nice. I like that.
Yeah, and Gina Carano's fight scene in Haywire, I think about like all the time. I haven't seen that movie in probably 6 years or something, and I still think about, how old is it? Am I losing track of time?
No, it's been a while.
Okay. It's been, I'm like, it's been.
But I think about that fight scene a lot. So she definitely has the physical prowess for a role that doesn't even like. She said she feels she's grown as an actress, but like the role doesn't demand a tremendous amount of range anyway. It demands tremendous delivery and physicality.
Yeah, and soul.
Yeah.
Certainly, we saw that when Peter Weller does take the mask off in the original and is processing the loss of his wife and his child and his life. So, all right, let's move on to our next story here. And this is the Star Wars and Kathleen Kennedy. I know some of you are going, again? Well, there have been some new comments. And she gave an interview to Rolling Stone where she talked a lot about the future of Star Wars. And she answered some really thoroughly some of these questions about why some directors have left the property. She also talked about how much she's enjoyed working with J.J. Abrams, how much J.J. Abrams, she was hoping J.J. Abrams could have done all 3 installments, where she sees Feige's film, which she claims to be is a ways off, and when we might see the next Star Wars movie. But what I want to talk about is Kim Masters' article in THR about Kathleen Kennedy and about this interview. Kim Masters is someone I really, really respect, whose work I've read for quite some time. Even got the chance to interview her for one of my podcasts, The Cinephiles. We talked about broadcast news with her. She's incredible. And so to see her break this thing down, I think she brought up a lot of interesting points about the future of Star Wars, about Bob Iger wanting to pick his own person to run this. Because remember, this whole thing happened. Kennedy was picked by George Lucas, I think, and then the idea of Feige being lined up to possibly run this thing. We talked about this. I sent it to my 2 guests here on the show today to talk about what she points out here. First of all, let's address this: the idea of Bob Iger and Alan Horn wanting to make their own pick. Do you think there's something bubbling underneath the surface here that is what's going on? And I liken it to like football and sports. Not to make it too, but like when an owner comes in or a new GM comes in, they want to select their coach, their own coach. They don't want to be handed a coach. Iger was kind of handed Kathleen Kennedy here. Do you think that this is something that he wants to do? Alisha, what do you think?
Yes and no. I feel like if things had been maybe a little bit less tumultuous, it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But I think that the way Kathleen Kennedy kind of runs Lucasfilm is very different than the way that they run Disney and to a lesser extent Marvel. I think Kathleen Kennedy, not to take anything away from her, I think she is one of Hollywood's best producers ever. She is a phenomenal producer and has been on board for so many classic films. But she's not really a risk taker, and she's not really the kind of visionary that they need to fully kind of steer this entire studio, not in the way, say, like Kevin Feige is. And in recent years, especially since the success of the MCU, I feel like Horn and Iger have been a little bit more, they're kind of realizing that they have to kind of evolve and they have to take risks. And I don't really see that happening in Star Wars. That's kind of the biggest problem. I love Star Wars, but that's one of the biggest problems I have right now is that they play it so safe because they're catering to that nostalgic fan base.
Yeah.
And it is hard to walk that line. Like, don't get me wrong. It's very hard to learn when to kind of try something new and when to kind of, be true to the spirit of the original. But at this point, I think that they need somebody who will maybe take a few more risks and kind of be a little bit more in line with their kind of overall vision. And I wonder if that's kind of what's happening here is a kind of a clash of long-term plans.
Yeah, Kim Master says that she speculates that in the article that it could be Feige or it could be Jon Favreau, which I hadn't really thought about, to be honest with you, until she framed it, especially with initially the success of Mandalorian, Dave Filoni being involved here. Could this be them grooming Favreau? Because as many of you know, and those of you who don't know, Kathleen Kennedy's extension is up in 2021, and she has made it clear that they're having a lot of talks. The next film is not till 2022, which is a year after her extension, if she doesn't sign an extension. So do you think that's what's happening here? That she's like doing good brand saving, good face saving, good PR work here, and then they're going to move on, and she senses they're going to move on, do you think? To Favreau or Filoni? What do you think?
It's certainly possible. The idea of Favreau is really peculiar, not because I don't like his work. I'm very much a fan of most of his work, and I think he's one of our best crowd-pleasing filmmakers, bar none. But just because his role in the industry and what he does is so very different from what Kevin Feige does and what Kathleen Kennedy does. Like, he is a filmmaker. He's an actor. He writes, he does his Netflix cooking shows.
Yeah, right.
Like he's
Chef,
not solely focused on producing in the way that those two are when you think of like the sort of producers that take hold of a massive franchise, enterprise, whatever. So I'm not sure I buy that.
Okay.
Just because I don't feel like, not that he's not qualified, but almost
Right.
like that's not what he does necessarily. I could see him being more of the Whedon and then the Russo brothers of what, taking the helm of the Marvel for a time and then passing the baton. As for Kathleen Kennedy, when I, reading this report, there's a lot of, it's all speculation, essentially.
Right, of course.
It's a speculative report. We all knew her contract was ending anyway, or her contract extension. So there's nothing in it that makes me go, yep, definitely happening.
Okay.
I think, of course, they're having those conversations, as you do any time a contract is coming to an end, especially, again, with such a massive franchise and company.
Yeah.
But I see what you mean about needing to take chances, but I also, like, The Last Jedi just happened, and I do get why she might have pulled back on taking chances in the aftermath.
I totally get that. I think the Star Wars saga is kind of untouchable, but it's ending, and so I think you need to take chances. Like, could you ever imagine them doing a Star Wars like what Taika Waititi did with Ragnarok and just going full zany comedy? Like, I could not conceive of that in Star Wars as it stands now. I wouldn't mind seeing, and this is really unconventional, but maybe that's what you need for Star Wars. I wouldn't mind seeing Favreau and Dave Filoni kind of tag team running Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
Because I think Dave Filoni, he's truly the unsung hero of the Star Wars world. Star Wars fans know that, most other fans don't, and he I think has a little bit more of the experience that you would need to kind of have, because he's kind of the creative visionary for the TV and animated end of things, which have been amazing.
Yeah.
So,
but as a protege of George Lucas, do you think he can bring that change that you're hoping to see?
he's doing The Mandalorian. He and Favreau developed that. So, and that's very different than anything we've seen. So I think there are going to be growing pains. Like no matter what, I think the Skywalker saga is done. It's coming to an end. And so I think that no matter what, you're going to have some growing pains, especially because you don't have, like Marvel, the whole backlog of comic books and, source material to kind of fall back on. There's stuff to dip into. But a lot of this they're kind of doing from scratch. So
I think that's what Kim Master speculates about. She says, she flat out says that Kathleen is not a creative producer. It's not her forte, right? Because she had Spielberg kind of doing that, and then her and Frank Marshall shepherding his film. So there is a possibility, depending on what, because maybe that's why she was the perfect person for this transition in the Star Wars, out of Lucas into this Disney area, wrapping up the Skywalker saga, and now that we have to create a bunch of new stuff, because The Mandalorian is going back to a time period that we know. It's set right after Jedi and before Force Awakens, so it's still a kind of relative time period that we've been around with these films. If we're going to start going Knights of the Old Republic, if we're going to start going light years into the future, and I don't know if Rian Johnson's going to still do his trilogy. He's been kind of half in, half out in some of the comments as well, and with Benioff and Weiss being jettisoned, I don't know where we go here, and so it seems to make sense, and I'm getting the vibe personally that they're doing, I think Kathleen Kennedy, if she walks away at 2021, has nothing to hang her head about. She can go look at these box office results. Yeah, were there issues with some directors? Sure. But she said in Rolling Stone, when asked about it, and you guys should definitely read this interview. It's a fantastic interview from her, for her. Every one of these movies is a particularly hard nut to crack. There's no source material. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels.
Yeah.
Right. It's a shot at, like, Game of Thrones and stuff. We don't have anything, or Lord of the Rings. We don't have anything other than passionate storytellers who get together and talk about what the next iteration might be. We go through a really normal development process that everybody else does. You start by talking to filmmakers who you think exhibit the sensibilities that you're looking for. And I would argue that the list is very small. People who really do have the sensibilities about these kind of movies, and then the experience and the ability to handle how enormous a job these movies are. So we try to be as thoughtful as we possibly can about making those choices. I would also argue that sometimes people get involved in the normal development process and then they realize, oh my God, this is so much more than I ever imagined. So it's pretty common that when you're working on movies, you're not making choices and decisions that necessarily work out exactly the way you want from the get-go. So I thought this was a very reasoned, logical response, something the internet sometimes rejects sometimes.
Wow.
And I really appreciated her giving a very thorough response, because she could have dismissed it and said, hey, some things just don't work out sometimes, that's all. But she went into it because I think she understands this is the one thing that people want to keep dinging her about. So why not give a very thorough answer about it that seems very logical and intelligent?
It's tough. Like, I mean, look, like, fans are going to say what they want to say,
Sure.
and they have a right to.
And they have a right.
They have a
Yes.
right to.
Absolutely.
But it's really, she's right. It's really hard to find directors that can handle vehicles of this size and this magnitude with this impact. You'll have fans saying, like, let the directors and filmmakers do what they want. And sometimes it works. Sometimes you get like a Todd Phillips Joker or a James Mangold's like Logan.
Right.
But at the same time, look at how many movies that we've tried that have been the keys to this giant franchise have kind of been handed to this smaller indie director with not a whole lot of experience doing something this big. And they couldn't handle it. And the movie was mediocre, or they cracked under pressure and they had to be replaced. So, I think James Gunn kind of started that trend when he did Guardians of the Galaxy, and he kind of set that precedent. Everybody thought, well, we'll just do that. And it's like, but there are very few filmmakers like James Gunn who can so easily step from small indie and like horror to this huge space opera Marvel movie.
Yeah.
And so I do think that fans, and even, us film critics and journalists, sometimes need to give Kathleen Kennedy a little bit more credit for just how hard her job has been since she stepped into that role. So I love that answer. I haven't read that interview yet, but I think she really is honest there, and she's right.
Yeah, she was asked about how have you thought about how much longer you'd like to keep doing what you're doing, right? She says, I've really enjoyed this. I have to say it's been incredibly exciting. And just the fact that George asked me to do this, I felt a tremendous responsibility with stepping in and taking care of the franchise. And if there were going to be new movies, to really pull a team around this that cared as much as he did. What happens in the future and how much longer I do this, I don't know yet. I'm looking at all of that. This is a very reasoned answer. It's been incredibly satisfying to reach this point that we've completed the saga, and I think made a really wonderful movie. It's going to feel very satisfying to the audience, so that's what I'm focused on right now at the moment. And what the future holds, who knows? So it seems to me, Haleigh, like she's being very circumspect about this.
Yeah, well, again, I think I hate to be the most repetitive, boring person, but I think these are the kinds of things people say when contract negotiations are happening, when a contract is coming up at its end. That said, it doesn't sound like she's trying to beat down the door and press to make it happen.
Right.
And I think I think it can be hard to imagine, like, why would you want to do anything other than Star Wars? But if you look at her resume, it's such like a varied and expansive resume, and she spent this like last chunk of her life doing one thing.
Yeah.
Maybe she wants to do other things, get back into like awards dramas or all her various sci-fi films. There's a lot that... It's a lot to ask one of the greatest producers to just do one thing for this long. And maybe not expect them to want to do something else after a while.
Well, I think this goes to your point you made earlier about Favreau. Favreau has his irons in many fires.
Yes.
And so to ask him to just, kind of centralize on just Star Wars, and that's what you have to do. You cannot go and do multiple things while you're focusing on Star Wars, because that's the first thing the fans are going to ding you about. The second there's something wrong, or you lose a director, or a film comes out that isn't good, well, because you were distracted doing your chef show. Who cares about your chef show? This is Star Wars.
I do.
Well, I'm just saying that's people react to it. You know, they'd be
Yes.
like, "Oh, who cares about Chip Show? This is Star Wars." So yeah, this makes it goes back to that. I like that idea that well, maybe he's not. So I go to Alisha's idea that maybe they work together in tandem, Filoni and him. But I still believe that they're just lining Feige up.
So I was just going to say, because
feels that way,
and
right?
here's what's interesting too, because so now Feige's getting into it, doing one movie, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, and Marvel fans are kind of like, oh, Feige's going to be with Marvel forever. I'm like, not true. Like Feige himself said in a recent interview, he's like, every couple of years, I think about doing something else and walking away. Feige loves Marvel, but fans also don't realize that Feige has not just been with Marvel since Iron Man. He's been with Marvel for everything, for Raimi Spider-Man's films, for all the Fox X-Men films, for the Fantastic Four, like all of it. He was a producer on all of those. So he's been with Marvel for what, 25 years. And as somebody who is a huge Marvel fan, you know, I don't know if I'd want to be with the same creative IP for my entire life. And so Feige himself has said, like, I don't know if I'm going to be staying with this. And I could absolutely see Feige stepping into that and kind of, you know, I think there are enough people with Marvel now maybe that they can not completely pass the torch, but start phasing it out and start phasing him into Star Wars. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that either.
Yeah, and we can't be simplistic about this. And I know fans want to be like, oh, this happened. There's so much going on behind the scenes, and they will, to me, the announcement of Feige doing a Star Wars film was a trial balloon to see how the fans reacted, see if they were excited about it. And, you know, Kathleen Kennedy in the interview says that Feige came to her and was like, or came to them and was like, hey, I'd like to do a Star Wars movie. But then she says it's ways off. And I think her saying ways off is her way of saying it'll happen down the road, but it's probably going to happen when Feige takes over Star Wars and makes it happen in his own way. And I think that's her way of kind of like, it's coded language. I always try to look at the coded language of these responses and these comments, because this is the level that people play at when they're at this level in Hollywood or any business. Coded language is a huge part of it. So we'll see what happens. I personally, initially I had some issues with Kathleen and the stuff with the directors, but as this has gone on, I've become more, I've had a more larger view of it, and you have to have nothing but respect for what she was able to do, because how many of you that are criticizing her could barely handle doing one movie, let alone a crap ton of movies and the books and the TV shows and the animated series and the comic books? It's a lot, and the video games. It's a lot to be under your control. So I think at the end of the day, she'll have nothing to hang her head about when she walks away, and I do believe she will walk away in 2021. She's done what she needs to do and brought it back into the forefront, into prominence, and made a lot of money for Disney. All right, let's move on to some quick promos here. Let's take a look at this first one from Ryan Satin and Pro Wrestling Sheet.
What's up, Collider fans? Ryan Satin here from ProWrestlingSheet.com, where you can find the top stories throughout the week in the world of professional wrestling. If you're a wrestling fan like myself, then you'd be doing yourself a disservice by not checking out all the shows we do every week on YouTube.com/C/Wrestling Sheet. In particular, on Wednesdays, we've got a SmackDown recap show hosted by John Rocha and myself, where we pick apart and talk about every little thing that happened on the Blue Brand. So do yourself a favor and go subscribe at youtube.com/C/Wrestling Sheet.
Well, there you go, my boy Ryan Satin. We're not doing the recaps anymore on SmackDown or Raw, which is sad for me, but I'm very happy for him doing stuff over at WWE Backstage. But he's still doing his show, the Pro Wrestling Sheet Radio Show, which I will be on today at 5 o'clock with him, and then we'll see when he drops it. But also, let's take a look at some other content here, and that's verbally from me. Ken Knapsack, the new leader of Collider Jedi Council, along with MF5, along with Ace Cabrera. They will be on later on today with a new episode of Collider Jedi Council. Look at those pretty faces. I haven't seen Ken smile like that in 20 years. It's so incredible how happy he is to be leading the new crew here into the future and the next phase of Collider Jedi Council. So watch that show later on today. All right, let's move on to our last show item, rather, and this is Alisha's favorite item because it's got to do with Dracula. Rocketman's. There you go.
I didn't even realize that was,
shout out to that shirt again. Rocketman's Dexter Fletcher. That's why the gentleman who directed that and also stepped in for Bryan Singer on Bohemian Rhapsody. By the way, watch the last 20 minutes of Bohemian Rhapsody the other day. Still one of the most incredible 20 minutes of film I've ever seen. If you enjoy that Live Aid, was it Live Aid? Is that what it was called? I think it was called Live Aid. I'm so old, I forget sometimes. Anyway, he's tackling a new challenge here into the Universal Monsters. This is so brilliant of Universal, so subtle. Like, just go do this for a little while. Go do this, Lee went out with Invisible Man. It's very chill as opposed to like, bam, Johnny Depp, bam, Tom Cruise, bam, Russell Crowe. This is more of a subtle approach to it and a brilliant approach to it. Smaller budgets, which could lead to bigger profits. All of this is brilliant. You get people involved in this who like doing a smaller type approach to films about larger topics. Certainly Rocketman is one of my favorite films from this past year that people don't give enough love to. So I'm excited to see Dexter Fletcher tackle this. But it is a Dracula movie, but with a twist. It's through Renfield's interpretation. Of course, last time I saw Renfield was Tom Waits in the Dracula film from Francis Ford Coppola, or even Artie Johnson in A Love at First Bite, for those old enough to remember that film. But Ryan Ridley from Rick and Morty is writing the script. It's based on an original pitch from Robert Kirkman of The Walking Dead fame. It's going to be produced by Skybound Entertainment, along with David Albert, Brian First, and Sean First. All right. Renfield was an inmate at a lunatic asylum who was thought to be suffering from delusions, but was actually a servant of Dracula. And rather than being a period piece, this is going to take place in present day. Alisha, are you excited about this new approach into the Dracula story?
Yes, for like 1,000 reasons. I've argued for years now when Universal said they wanted to get into the whole, kind of extended, interconnected universe game. I was like, I said, oh man, why are they doing these huge action movies? Make them horror. You can do an interconnected universe with horror movies.
Right.
Horror is huge. Like, make them small budget. And then it was like, it didn't work. And then years later, now they're doing exactly what I have said they should do for ages. And so I love that they're doing this now. I also love that I'm a sucker. So my background is in lit, and like I have a whole background in teaching literature and everything. And I love when classical stories are taken and kind of flipped around and they're told from the perspective of one of the supporting characters. So I kind of really like that they're doing an into Dracula from his, kind of his lackey and his minion. It's a really interesting team behind it. So you have Dexter Fletcher, who's known for musicals. You have Robert Kirkman, who's best known for horror and especially The Walking Dead. And then you have, somebody from Rick and Morty. So I'm like, is this going to be like a dark comedy musical horror? But it's a really great team. Yeah. It's a really interesting team, and I'm with that, with Lee Whannell's like Invisible Man, and with how they're going with these smaller, kind of weirder, quirkier filmmakers. I'm excited for it. I'm really intrigued to see what they'll do with this.
Yeah, and I think Fletcher's doing Sherlock Holmes 3. So right, is that right? So I mean, he certainly. He does have an interest in other genres and other approaches to things. I find this to be a fascinating team to put together. And I don't know if it's Renfield the musical, but I like the idea of, I like the idea of using
Rocky Horror Picture Show too. I'm kind of
it's not bad. I like the idea. Give me the insects. I like the idea of it through his eyes, how we see Dracula, his experience. And if they're doing modern day, then I wouldn't be surprised if there's an allusion to Renfield in Lee Whannell's Invisible Man. Do you like this approach? Do you like Dexter Fletcher stepping into this situation? Like, does this excite you about retelling the Dracula story again?
Yes, so much more than, look, I love Dracula movies. There are probably literally thousands of them. It's an insane amount of Dracula movies on the market. Not aware of too many Renfield movies. So that sounds way cooler to me.
Yeah.
And I just think that, especially what we've seen them try to do with Dracula over the last 20 years is not usually panned out very well. So this is much more interesting to me. And I do wonder what becomes the role of the iconic character in that context. Like, how much is Dracula in the film? How is he portrayed? Is he scarier from Renfield's perspective than from his own perspective? Those are all interesting factors to me. And I think probably everyone in our horror community was like, make them horror movies, you fools.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm very, very gratified to see that happening. But I'm also excited that they've got, what's it called? Dark Army or something with Paul Feig directing. And, and he's a very hard to pin down filmmaker who walks through tone and genre often quite elegantly. Spy is wonderful. I
Yes.
also love The Heat, and I think The Heat is a super underrated buddy cop comedy.
It really
Don't
is.
disagree. It has one of my favorite jokes the last 10 years. The albino joke when he says to him, he goes, "Are you okay? You look a little pale." That joke broke me in half in the theater.
Oh, yeah?
When she
That did it
says
for
that
you?
to him. Yeah. That I had to run across the aisland to keep laughing to keep away from everybody
Most
else.
of her delivery in that film is pretty exceptional.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
But I like that all of his movies embrace different recognizable genres. I haven't seen Last Christmas yet, but again, Christmas rom-com.
I loved it.
Very familiar.
I loved
It
Simple
was
Favor is another
great.
one.
Oh,
It was, you know what? I'm in for cheesy rom-com.
Thank
an
you, Alisha.
optimistic
Like,
table.
Thank you, Alisha. It
Like-
was so good. And Simple Favor, which I really did not want to watch. I'm like, no, Blake Lively, no. Even though I loved her in the Shark
Shallows?
movie. The Shallows was great. I was like, no. And then I watched it. I was like, damn, this was good. It gets me excited for her film in January coming out as well, that action film she has. So yeah, Paul Feig, a lot of different interesting choices. So I like that they're choosing these directors that have a strong fan base within the independent film community and some of the mainstream film community, so you understand what you're getting when you're walking into this, and it excites you, don't you think?
I do think you sort of understand what you're getting, but I also think that part of the appeal of all three filmmakers is their ability to subvert what you think you're going to get from a genre.
Absolutely.
Even Lee Winnell, like, if you go back and watch Saw is probably not the movie you think it is based on your memory of the franchise. Saw is a detective noir, but he junked it all up with some real nasty horror stuff. Insidious is a very classic haunted house movie until it's not, and it's also weirdly funny half the time.
Right.
So I just like that all these filmmakers, Dexter, Fletcher, we don't have as many films on his resume that aren't from an acting perspective, but Rocketman is a very inventive musical approach to a biopic. And I think the same, and maybe less inventive, but very tonally singular, Eddie the Eagle is a very interesting
Yes.
approach
Yeah.
to the sports movie.
I forgot he did that. Yeah.
So
Enjoyed that
they
film.
all have access to genre storytelling in a way that you do sort of know what you're going to get with them. They have a resume of proven films, but you cannot quite predict what their read on the subject matter will be.
I think the overall thing you take away is quality.
Yeah.
With all three of them. A lot of examples of quality in multiple genres. So why not see what a Renfield film? And also, it can lean itself to an unreliable narrator. If he's in the lunatic asylum, it's an unreliable, or it could even touch on mental health issues, which has been really prevalent nowadays in films and television.
One of the most interesting books I ever read in school, my past life in academia, was Wide Sargasso Sea. So, anybody that's read Jane Eyre, knows that she, in the end, marries Mr. Rochester. Spoilers. Marries Mr. Rochester.
For an over century-old book.
But he has his crazy, wife locked up in the attic. But Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys is told from her perspective, his wife's, Antoinette's perspective. Before she even meets him. And so it kind of shows how she descends into madness and how he pushes her along into that just by neglect and just not treating her well.
Right.
And so it's a really interesting kind of spin on this is the character that was just written off as crazy in the original novel. And now she's allowed to tell her story. So I think that's a really interesting way of framing and reframing old stories. And so I'm really fascinated to see, because maybe you do something where, he is a very unreliable narrator, or maybe he's completely sane, but nobody thinks he is. And so,
like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead is a fantastic new way into Hamlet. I would love to see. I think there is an Ophelia book told from her perspective, I think, or a play told from her perspective about the Hamlet story. So having other characters speak about a subject you've already seen, or a play or a book you've already experienced, I think is a new and interesting way to go into it. So we'll see if it works. Either way, Dexter, Fletcher, Renfield coming soon. We'll see what happens with that. All of us seem to be very excited to see what they can do with this. And shout out to Universal for course correcting and not not like making it a big deal. They just understood they made some mistakes here with the Dark Universe. Course correct. Still thought they had something good to salvage, and they're doing it in an interesting and new way. So I like it.
I think my favorite thing about it is there's no way, 0%, anytime last week anyone was like, what news do you think is going to break last week? Nobody would have guessed that.
yeah.
All right, let's get into some live chat questions. Dorian picked out some for us to answer before we wrap up here today. Rix Amoris goes, and I don't know if this is going to work. I have a question. Do you want to see Miranda back on the reboot of Lizzie McGuire? Does anybody watch Lizzie McGuire on this
Hell
table?
yeah. Why bring back Lizzie if you're not bringing back Miranda? And they got Gordo already, so make it happen, guys. Yes, firm answer.
I am so old for this conversation. Miranda was her friend, right?
Yeah.
All
With
right.
that funky hair, dude.
Yeah, sure. Bring back Miranda.
Yeah.
I'm Team Miranda.
All right, there we go. I've never seen the show. I'm just happy Lizzie's back. I love Hillary Duff. She's the best. All right. MK Somberg is asking, Todd Phillips came out via IndieWire and denied the THR report of meeting with Emmerich as well as any contracts in place for a sequel. Do you think the THR article was sourced poorly or did they jump the gun? Tough question.
I don't think it was sourced poorly. I mean, it's THR and it's Tatiana, so she tends not to, like, if it's her, if it's Boris Kit, like, they tend to do their work.
Yeah, especially THR.
Yeah, so I think it probably goes back to what Haleigh was saying before, is this is kind of, you're not going to talk about contract negotiations. We're in the middle of contract negotiations, and so it's always the song and dance, like, well, there've been talks, but nothing concrete, but blah, 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 blah. I mean, we've seen Ewan McGregor talk, on his rounds about how he's had to sit on Obi-Wan Kenobi coming back and being in talks with Disney for literally years. So
There are also people who just straight up lie and admit
Yes.
it. Yeah. Like Taika Waititi will lie to you.
Oh yeah.
In a on the record interview, and then like in the next interview, he'll be like, "Oh, I made that up. That's not true."
Wow.
Like they just because it's not their like. They're supposed to keep secrets.
Yeah.
That's part of their job.
Yeah. Well, I always bristle at another outlet countering another outlet so firmly and so vehemently and like Deadline did towards THR. Our sources say it's flat false, and I think it's a dangerous thing to walk. But these are the battles that go on with outlets sometimes. This was from IndieWire. Todd Phillips says, I can honestly say to you, there was no meeting that ever happened on October 7th where I marched in. First of all, if you know me and my career, that's not my style. I made a huge comedy at Warner Bros. The Hangover, and I didn't suddenly become a comedy factory producer. Like, oh, let's just turn out movies. Bradley Cooper and I have a production company at Warner's. I've been at Warner's for 14, 15, 16 years. We have 2 things in development at all times, not 40 things like some people speculated. I'm not the kind of guy who goes marching in saying, I want these 40 titles. I just don't have the energy. When I pitched them Joker, it wasn't a movie. It was, let's do a whole label. They shut that down quickly, and I get it. Who am I to walk in and start a label at a film studio? But they said, let's do this one. So that's kind of readjusting the commentary here. So we'll see.
It's also not a no.
Not a no.
Not a no.
Exactly.
Like, extremely long way to not say no. In fact, and to be like, I'm not a comedy factory, but he did make 3 Hangover movies.
right.
So like, I'm not sure where you're getting there.
I also think it's smart of Warner Brothers to kind of keep a lid on things. I think their problem for a really long time wasn't a product problem, it was a PR problem because everything leaked.
Yes.
And so I think they're smarter to be like, we have no idea what you're talking about. Like we those talks never happened. So I think that's smart.
It's certainly possible, Alisha, that like some sources leaked this to THR. THR ran with it, and then other sources that Warner Brothers sent out went to Deadline and said, hey, this is not true, this didn't happen, blah, 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 to kind of counter the narrative and throw everything up in the air so that people don't know because they're still negotiating this stuff. That's certainly possible. We've seen that happen. J. Scott for real goes, which talents from Noah Hawley's Fargo Legion Bones alumni should he tap to appear in his Star Trek film? Haleigh has mentioned Gene Smart.
Always bring in Gene Smart for anything. Also, anyone from the cast of Legion would be great. Aubrey Plaza is amazing. Dan Stevens is amazing. Jermaine Clement is amazing. All of them would be wonderful. Particularly, I'd like to see Jermaine Clement play like a weird alien type creature.
I could see that.
Yes.
So he did it in Men in
No
Black
disrespect
3.
to Fargo, but I guess I just really like that cast.
He certainly did it in Men in Black 3.
Patrick Wilson, Fargo season 2. He should also be in everything.
Okay.
Yes.
Everything.
Patrick Wilson makes everything better. I also am I know I already mentioned him, but I'm such a Ewan McGregor fan. Like I'm so glad we're here for the McGregor sons. Like I really am. I'm trying to make that phrase happen. It's not happening so far.
Doesn't flow quite as well
It
as the
doesn't.
McConnell
It doesn't.
sons.
It doesn't.
We'll workshop it.
I like to throw Rachel Keller in there. I always think she gets unfairly looked
yeah.
over in Legion. I have been a fan of hers since
thinking
Fargo
Sorry,
season
not
2.
Legion.
I think Fargo season 2, she was in Fargo season 2, and then they moved her over into Legion, and I enjoy her work very much. Another one that could jump from Fargo is Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I'd like to see her be a part of the Star Trek universe. That could be interesting. She doesn't get enough love as an actress. Those could be interesting choices.
Honestly, his shows have really good casting.
They
so
do.
just close your eyes and point.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point. All right, our last question here to wrap up. Let's see. It's Rick's Amoris. What others 80s film or series would you want to see get a reboot in the style that's being pitched for Robocop, where they're picking up right after the last film? Or the first film, rather.
The Breakfast Club.
Ooh, interesting. Now, wait. A new Breakfast Club or them now?
They're the parents. And now you follow their kids dealing with all the stuff that modern kids are dealing with now, with school shootings and with race relations and with, social media and revenge porn and all of that. So yeah, do a Breakfast Club, but set it now and have them be the parents.
Now, can you have a Breakfast Club where the nerds are the jocks? The nerds are the popular kids at the school now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, make it, because
kids.
kids still have massive problems. They're just very different than what it was in the 80s. So I think you can make a really interesting movie that kind of shows, kind of a classic like you did back in the 80s with Breakfast Club, but then take that whole crew, make them the parents and their kids be the ones that get stuck in detention or somewhere together.
Tackle that cancel culture thing as well that goes on in high schools. What do you say there, Haleigh?
It's a really interesting pick. My mind wasn't there at all. I was like, what is a franchise that went way off track? But that didn't lead me to anything. So I'm just going to say Big Trouble in Little China, because I want to, is that what they're doing though? Did I just
there's rumors that The Rock is going to redo it, yes.
Okay, I don't want that. No, I want to see Kurt Russell come back.
Okay.
And have another
de-age him.
ridiculous adventure. And yeah, I know. And in fact, don't you dare.
Do not touch him.
Yeah. But that's my pick. I want to see it get weird, and you can't make that movie the same way in 2019. So that would be an interesting challenge to watch them confront. Although I do think that film is actually shockingly smart about race and the way that actually he's not the hero.
Yeah, he
just doesn't realize he's the sidekick.
Yeah, at all. I mean, when he shoots out the ceiling and knocks himself out, it's a brilliant moment.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Took a while for me to come around to that movie. I resisted it for a very, very long time.
Huge mistake.
Yeah, very much so. We shook the pillars of heaven, Wang. Here's two things for you. The Lost Boys. I'd love to see them do a Lost Boys sequel. They've been kicking that around for so long, picking up from now. Jason Patric's still around. Certainly Kiefer Sutherland's still around. There's a lot of people. I don't know if Corey Feldman, if you want Corey Feldman involved, but maybe. But certainly that'd be fun to kind of pick up where they left off there. And Gremlins. Can you pick up right after the original Gremlins, ignore the new batch, and just pick up from there? I know Phoebe Cates is still around. I don't know is it Zachary? I forget the lead guy's name, but he might be. I'm sure he's still kicking around. So that might be fun to explore.
Then can we have Key and Peele get together and do another classic Key and Peele sketch about Gremlins 3, which would be amazing.
Talk about the Gremlins. Anyway, all right. Well, that's our live episode of Collider Movie Talk for this lovely Thursday morning. Hope you're having a great day, and we're helping you start out your day with this, unique brand of humor and intellectual conversation. I want to thank these two amazing ladies for joining me today. Thank you, Haleigh Foutch.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alisha Grauso.
Thanks.
Where can they find the stuff you do, Alisha?
They can find me at adamtickets.com/movie-news. And you can find me on Twitter with my screen name. It's just my name.
Yeah, that's right. That's Alisha with an SH, not a CIA. Haleigh, where can they find you? Got anything coming up that you're writing? Any big feature you're working on to look for?
Ooh, a big feature? Well, Collider's going to be pushing out Collider.com, I should say, is going to be pushing out our best of the decade content over the Thanksgiving holiday season.
Nice.
And that has ruined my life for 2 weeks. So that's really all I have room for in my brain.
Fair enough.
But yes, you can find me on Collider.com and at Haleigh Foutch on the Twitters and at Haystack McGroovy on Instagram.
Right. And Witching Hour every week with her and Terry Emroff.
That's a thing I co-host.
There you go. You can follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter and on Instagram. Don't forget, there's a new deep cut coming out tomorrow. Scott Brooks will be my guest. He is the producer for The Report. We sat down at his house in Venice to have a conversation for an hour about his process in creating that film, which is a fantastic film with Adam Driver and Annette Bening. Shout out to Adam Smith there in the booth for switching with us. Shout out to Thad and Dorian who are in the chat. And don't forget, Collider Live coming to you in 8 minutes live. Collider Live there with Roxy Stryer, Darina Riley, and assorted other guests throughout the 2 hours. So go enjoy that, and we'll talk to you tomorrow morning for another live episode of Collider Movie Talk at 9 a.m. PT. Take care until then.